Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. I want to bring a weekly recap of the market here as we take a look at Bitcoin and some of the moves over the past week. And then we'll deep dive into where is Bitcoin going potentially into the next week or so. The month of August is finally done, and what a month it has been. I mean, we started the month after these highs here towards the end of July. The month had already started to sell off as we entered August. And for the first half of the month, it was just this brutal sell-off. The alts got smacked hard as Bitcoin continued to sell off. We were all looking at 6K. Was it going to hold this time? And we did hold. And then it went into this period of just choppy action for a couple of weeks. And only in the last week and a half have we seen some pretty decent action. Many of the alts have been very strong. We've seen some good rallies. There's been plenty of good tradable opportunities. And so here we are pausing a little bit again. And the question remains, was that the end of the move? Was this just a bounce? Or could we potentially be starting another leg up? And most importantly, a lot of the questions I'm getting recently is alt season upon us? Is this it? Have we hit the bottom? Or is there more to come? And so I want to explore some of those thoughts and look at a couple of options near term as we head into the weekend. Just some areas to look at, some things to keep an eye on here over the next couple of days. But first, let's take a quick look at the total market cap here. So looking at the performance of the billion plus club here for the week, IOTA was the winner. 35% move in the last 7 days, followed by Dash. EOS was strong. Monero has been very strong today. And we saw just across the board, just a lot of good moves here this week. Even with this pause that we've seen here over the last couple of days, over the last week, many of these alts put in some pretty solid gains. Bitcoin up 5% in the week. Looking at the BTC dominance chart, you can see here, since mid-August, the alts have actually started to keep up a little bit. And you can see the Bitcoin dominance has basically been sitting right around that 53, 54% over the last week or so. And the one thing that is not happening is Ethereum still not keeping up with Bitcoin or outperforming in any way. But many of the other alts have been. IOTA, EOS, NEO, even Litecoin is starting to pop a little bit here. So we'll take a look at some of those charts. But all around, the BTC dominance still sitting there around that 53% move in the coin market cap, now over $200 billion, $227 billion here. But let's take a quick look at the charts here. Here's the daily chart of Bitcoin on Bitstamp. You can see here. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at the weekly chart because it's important to keep this big picture in mind. We're still within this broader pattern, right? This descending triangle pattern that has yet to resolve itself. So you got to keep that in mind. Certainly within this pattern, there has been some good tradable rallies. And could this go higher? Absolutely. It can continue to higher to the trend line. There's some intermediate levels to keep an eye on between now and then. But you also got to remember that if it starts to roll over, that's going to be the big level to be watching. Do we break these lows around that 58, 5900 level? And if so, I expect you'd see a pretty quick sell-off from there. But until that happens, you just got to keep this broader pattern in mind, because while the alts remain strong and there certainly has been some very good rallies, ultimately Bitcoin's going to kind of lead the overall direction once this pattern is resolved. So just something to keep in mind there. But you can see over the last 3 weeks, we've had this nice little rally. We're going on 3 weeks of green now, but volume is lighter here and it's declining a little bit as this bounce materializes. And so just something to keep in mind. You could argue this is the bear flag continuing to happen here on this weekly chart, hitting a little bit of a resistance point here now. And so the question remains, do we see this trend continue? Or are we going to pause here and start to pull back? And if we pull back, then looking for that higher weekly low is going to be important. So let's take a quick look at the closer price action. Look at the near term though on the daily chart. This is very healthy action. The 10 EMA is trending up. You can see every pullback has been contained at that moving average. The most recent pullback here was very good to see that 6,800 held, which was the breakout point, as well as a key Fibonacci retracement level that I was watching. So if we highlight that here, what I was looking for on this pullback was that 382 level, which was sitting right around 67.90, and that $6,800 level, which was that breakout point, to hold. It was very important that the bulls defended that, and it was good to see that they did. Now it made for a nice little quick pullback, and it was a short trade for me on the Ethereum side. We'll take a look at that chart. But once Bitcoin hit its target around 6,800, I closed out my shorts, and that turned out to be a pretty good play there because we quickly saw the buyers come back in, and so far we're bouncing. So now that we've bounced, where do we go from here? So there's two things that I'm going to be watching here over the next couple of days. Now this is the 4-hour chart, so keep in mind this is a little bit more granular, closer look. What we don't want to see is this second rally to finish shy of the first one here and then start to roll over. If it does, that could begin to look like a big double top that's forming here. And then again, the level to keep an eye on would be that 6,800. If this rolls over and breaks below that, you're going to have a big double top set in place, and that will not be bullish. So that's going to be the thing we don't want to see here going into the next couple of days. If that starts to roll over that way, certainly that'll give the sellers some more reason to start selling again, and we can start to see that short interest rise, which even during this pullback, the short interest continue to drop, which is positive. Now, what I do want to see here is, let me zoom out a little bit. I mean, this on the daily chart is just forming a nice little bit of a bull flag. So we want to see this thing break out to the upside and clear this most recent high around 71.25. If we can break higher, then the next level to be watching here is going to be around that $7,300 to $7,400 zone. That's going to be your next major resistance point. And then ultimately, a retest of this broader trend line that's in place. And so it varies a little bit by the exchange, but generally it's around this $7,500 mark or so, and that's what I'm going to be watching. So near term, if this continues to rally, 7,300 is going to be my first watch number, and then ultimately that $7,500 zone around that trend line. And we want to see this thing break higher, and we want to see some volume coming in as it does. Like I said, if this rolls over, it could materialize into a double top, but I'm not going to necessarily get bearish right away until we actually can clear below this 6790, 6800, because another thing that could happen is this could just go and form a big continuation pattern, which would be very strong. And I personally would like to see that scenario play out where over the next couple of days, we just kind of chop around here and build this big base, because then that'll set up a nice base from which we can break higher above 7100 and then really continue the momentum to the upside. A pause is always healthy, and as long as the sell-off and the volume doesn't get too extreme to the downside, this would be an ideal scenario for me. So that's something I'm going to be watching out for over the next couple of days. Just the levels to keep an eye on here near term though, 6,800, and then on the upside, this most recent high, we need to break out above that. But let's take a quick look at some of the alts here. So first off, Ethereum. Ethereum hasn't quite had that run that Bitcoin and many of the other alts have. So you can see it's still overall lagging. It's just kind of sitting tight in this little bit of a range. Now, when BTC had that sell-off, I did take a quick short on Ethereum. And just because it has been the weaker one, and you can see here on the short term, this was a very short-term trade. You had this little double top that formed on the hourly charts. Then we had a break, rallied right into that resistance, and then we had this sell-off. And that's what I was looking for here. It was just a quick trade off of this move lower. I was looking for BTC to retrace back to 6,800. And once it hit 6,800, then that was my cue to close out the shorts. So I closed out my ETH trade here around that 277 zone. And then we had some news from the CBOE talking about futures, and you had that little pop on Ethereum quickly thereafter. So it was good to be out of that trade when that happened. But since then, you can see this has not bounced back nearly as strong as Bitcoin has. So still very much the laggard here. If you go to the BTC chart, you can see on the Bitcoin pair, it's still just lagging here. Now you have this big wick that happened on Binance, not showing up on some of the exchanges, but if you look at just the candle bodies, you can see it's still just drifting lower and just not showing a lot of strength relative to Bitcoin, but it is forming a little bit of a falling wedge. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on this upper trend line to break, and that may signal that maybe Ethereum's done and putting in a little bit of a low, but near term, absolutely not outperforming Bitcoin from that perspective. Now looking at Litecoin, you can see Litecoin is trying to hold and has been basically at par with BTC here for the last couple of days. So it's trying to find a little bit of a low, clearly establishing a support zone. So that must hold now. The longer this holds, the more important it becomes. You can see we've just tested this. Now you can also argue that, hey, this is a little bit of a descending triangle that's forming. That's not bullish, but I'm going to be keeping an eye out on the upper trend line. If this starts to go, then you can start to see Litecoin outperform a little bit here in the near term. Looking at the dollar pair, you can see here it's been relatively strong. Similar pattern to BTC here, just kind of stair-stepping its way higher. A couple of days of pullback here, hitting the 10 EMA and trying to get going again. So I'm liking Litecoin here. If I start looking at a BTC trade, I may just go with Litecoin because it'll likely outperform in the near term if they get going again. EOS. Now, EOS has had a pretty good move here, especially in the last couple of days. We saw a nice little strong rally following this continuation here. You saw once we had that breakout there, I mean, over the last couple of days, you know, up 32%, had a little bit of a pullback, trying to rally here right now. And again, similar to BTC, This is looking strong, has a lot of upside momentum to it, but we don't want to see is a double top forming right here. There is a slight divergence showing up on the RSI. You can see this first run higher. The RSI was way up here at 82. This most recent run, the RSI can't even clear 70. And so something I'm keeping an eye on here near term. I like the setup here, but it needs to push higher, because if it starts to roll over with the RSI really lagging here, that's going to confirm a little bit of a double top. Ultimately, it won't be confirmed until you break below that 579, 580 level. And what we want to see too is if BTC just decides to consolidate further here over the next couple of days, again, this is another candidate where it could set up a good continuation pattern and something you want to keep an eye on here over the next couple of days, because once they break out above that resistance level, which for EOS is going to be around that 650, then that sets up some good momentum. On the upside, the next target to be watching is that $7 mark in and around that zone. That's going to be your first big resistance level, and then above that, going into around 779, 760 or so. IOTA, again, one of the big winners this week, but finally consolidating a little bit here and just kind of meandering its way. Not a lot of action here today on IOTA. The level to be watching on the downside here, you can see versus BTC, right around that 963 or so. Looking at it from the USD pair, getting very symmetrical here. You can see we've had this low and then a little bit of a lower high, and now just kind of sitting tight here. So in the very short term, getting above 74 cents will be positive on IOTA. Below on the downside, got to hold 66 cents or so. Break below that, it's going to start to look real toppy. So just kind of consolidating here right now in the near term. Going to the daily chart though, you can see how strong this one was for a couple of days, and just the last 3 days pulling in a little bit. Normal consolidation, all things considered. I mean, it's just letting the 10 EMA catch up here a little bit. Doge. Okay. Any of you guys that have been following me for a long time know I usually don't talk about Doge. But for those of you that are always asking me, hey, can we take a look at the Doge chart? Here it is. Okay, you win this round. Doge has been crazy strong here the last couple of days. There's been some news, but I thought I'd mention it. It's a big winner today, so you got to look at that chart. And finally, Ontology. And you can see Ontology also was a huge winner a couple weeks back, pulled back, gave a nice little secondary entry, made for a good little quick trade here this week, but you can see it found resistance right near the prior old high. Right now it's pulling back a little bit, similar to the other ones. You don't want to see this pullback go too much further, because if it does, then it will form a big double top. But this one right now is looking bullish still, as long as this 10 EMA continues to hold on this little bit of a pullback, because it will begin to form a little bit of a cup handle type of pattern. Not a clean one, but the psychology, the result is basically the same. You have a test of resistance, you have a pullback, another test of resistance, and you're pulling back. Now, if this pullback is mild and continues to hold here, then what I'm going to be keeping an eye out is for a break of this downtrend first, and then ultimately clearing this resistance. That'll set up for another leg higher. Then on that scenario, I'm looking for an upside of around 389 or so, and then maybe as high as 460. So this one's looking pretty good here. Could give another run higher if it can break above this resistance. And it's going to be a setup I'm going to be keeping an eye on here going into the weekend. So that's going to be it for today, guys. I appreciate you guys being here. It's been a wild August, to say the least. I'm looking forward to September, seeing what things have for us. I know it's a holiday weekend here in the States, so some of you guys will be out on travel. Stay safe. Enjoy your time off. I'll see you guys next week. Until next time, take care, everyone.